We're doubling down on renewable energy. So the other byproduct of landfills is primarily methane gas, and this is a naturally occurring byproduct in a landfill. And we realize that this can be turned into either power, or through some of our most recent joint venture initiatives with our Kia Energy, we're going to be taking landfill gas and making it into RNG. So it's going to be a low carbon fuel source for fleet vehicles.
The recycling rates in the U.S., my understanding is they're fairly low. Do you know the number off the top of your head? And then what are some of the biggest challenges in recycling that you see?
Yeah, so the recycling rate over the last handful of decades has grown significantly, but it's still hovering in the low 30%. I think it's somewhere around 32%. So a lot of work to be done there. And it isn't necessarily because things can't be recycled. It's just simply that, us as consumers, we potentially aren't putting these things in the recycling bin to begin with. Or a subset of that is that, we're eager to recycle and we throw the wrong thing in the bin. We become a wish cycler, right? You throw something in the bin, unsure if it can be recycled or not, and then you actually do more harm than good, whether it be to the process itself or contaminating other good recyclables along the way. So, definitely room for improvement. Recycling infrastructure across the United States, the recycling accessibility. Just about every single major metropolitan area has some level of either curbside or single stream, all-in-one recycling, whatever you want to call it. Rural areas, you can see that there's some disparity there in terms of access, but there's a lot of access to recycling. And so that's where, again, us as consumers, we really have a role to play that, when we drink a water bottle or, a soda bottle, got to take it home and recycle it if there's not something out in the community. Because once something goes into the trash stream, largely it's not being recovered, right? It's pretty impossible to sort through the trash to try to pull out good recoverable materials. You can capture some things, right? Some other things are more resilient than others, and they're going to be beverage containers largely, right? A glass bottle, a plastic bottle, but they're very soiled and they're very difficult to market. And that's why it's so important that, when you have materials that are good recyclable materials, they go in the recycling bin. You can't confuse the fact that, it looks like the same trucks coming by the house, they're, especially with Republic, they're all big blue trucks.
One came by yesterday.
Yeah, there you go, right? But it's a different truck that's actually picking up the material and taking it to an entirely different facility for a completely separate process. So it's imperative that we put those things in the right bin.
And do you have, like, my sister lives in Orange County, and maybe she's not doing it, but she's like, oh, we just throw it in one bin, they figure it out. I said, I don't think so.
Yeah, I have family in Orange County as well, particularly in Laguna Niguel. So I know who the service provider is down there. And, that's largely what's going to be happening, is that if you're throwing every single thing that you are throwing away into one bin, you are going to lose a good portion of recoverable materials, right? Fiber is what we call paper and cardboard largely. That gets soiled with food and liquid. It's trash now. So those mixed waste systems, they're not the most efficient because you do lose good valuable materials in the process.
Yeah, can you maybe, stepping back at a macro level, just explain to people, you said this a little bit earlier, I think most of us, we throw things in the trash and we're like, oh, we're back on to our daily life. I'll probably overlay a picture I took for Earth Day. I laid in a pile of my family's trash for a year. So I did a week's worth, and we laid in a football field, and then we shot this football field with a drone. Somebody let me borrow their football field. I said, well, I'm going to use Photoshop to cut and paste by 52. So I was like, I wonder what that would look like. And it looked like you would imagine. It looked way messed up. You're like, there's no way I'm producing this much. And you realize you do. And like, I think as a family, we're pretty environmentally conscious, but I wouldn't say we're super extremist at all. We're like, and part of it was, I think we're far more now, we're getting more and more that way because we're learning through just doing this show of like, oh, where does it make sense and where does it not? But again, it was kind of eye-opening for me going through that process. So maybe again, stepping back, can you kind of explain to people kind of what, at a high level, like what happens? So the truck comes by, takes it, then what?
Yeah. So, again, trash goes through an entirely different process, recycling to another. And, depending on locale, the intermediary process, if you will, can look slightly different, but largely it's the same, right? Recycling is going to what we refer to as a MRF. It's MRF. It's Material Recovery Facility Recycling Center, right? So we take all the mixed commodities there. It's run through a fairly automated system. Most systems these days are pretty automated, that they have machines doing an initial separation. We're separating them into individual commodity streams, right? It's just just cardboard, it's just paper, it's just glass, aluminum, tin, the different grades of plastic. People are there as well, and they're following up with quality control. And then once materials are separated, we bale them, and then we ship them off to be turned into new materials. Trash is different in a way that, it's still collected at the curb. Sometimes it goes to a transfer station, transferred onto a larger truck, depending on the proximity of the landfill to the service area. And then ultimately it's dropped in the landfill. But landfills themselves, there's a lot of misconceptions around what they are and what they do. And, they've changed significantly in the last handful of decades as well. You can look up something called Subtitle D, and Subtitle D really changed the rules and regulations of how a landfill is set up. And there's a lot of environmental protections that go into the engineering of a landfill. Liner systems, gas wells, leachate collection systems. And so essentially when the trash is dropped there, it's compacted. Compaction is really how we extend the life of a landfill and really maximize the space that we're working with. And then ultimately it's covered with what we call final cover, and it's going to be dirt. Again, depending on the locale, one thing that Republic Services has really been doubling down on is realizing that in a landfill, you've got essentially two byproducts of waste. One is going to be a liquid waste. It's called leachate. It's kind of like a gray water.
I thought you said lychee before, and that's what my wife drinks that, and that tastes like liquid waste to me.
Yeah, the leachate would probably be significantly worse tasting, but lychee, I'm with you. It doesn't taste very good either. But we pull that out of the hill, and we manage it in different ways. Some places around the country, when we have closed sites, we do what's called phytoremediation. So we actually use this leachate to water specifically selected poplar trees or vetiver grasses, and they're using the the constituents of leachate, heavy metals and things like that, as micro and macronutrients to fuel their growth. So they're also sequestering carbon through their growth, right? Naturally through photosynthesis, but us having to reduce the amount of tanker trips to take leachate out to a water treatment facility or to another area to treat it. But one of the really cool things that I was mentioning that we're doubling down on is renewable energy, right? So the other byproduct of landfills is primarily methane gas. And so this is a naturally occurring byproduct in a landfill. And we realize that this can be turned into either power, right? Through landfill gas to energy, or through some of our most recent joint venture initiatives with Archaea Energy, we're going to be taking landfill gas and making it into RNG. And that can be used in fleets. So it's going to be a low carbon fuel source for fleet vehicles.
Yeah, that's awesome. I do think the future, I'm optimistic. We talked about globalization. There's a lot of great things that came out of that. But also what you think about is like all this stuff that's just accumulating locally. And so it seems like, how do you tap into that more? And like our waste stream is a good example of that. Like to us as consumers, the value is now gone. It's in the trash. But that doesn't mean there's still not value in there to be had. And that's where I think, Republic Services can think like, okay, well, there's a big cost to dealing with humanity's trash, but are there potential economic upsides to kind of leveraging some of this? And I think that's one perfect example. And at the same time, you're solving I think one of our biggest challenges in our lifetime is going to be how do we harness energy more? Electricity demand and demands on our grid, especially in the next 30 years, is going to be significant. And I think like the EV adoption is awesome. Like we continue to exceed kind of some of the expectations of what that's going to be. But where are we in 10 years? There's like, we'll talk about EV charging stations. There's like 160,000 of them in the US. I think by 2030, we need to have 2 million of them to keep up the demand. How are we going to do things like that?